Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the channel. And today I'm going to go my review of WCW Starrcade 1998. Starting off the evening, we'll go to our first match of the night. It is for the WCW Cruiserweight Championship. It is Rey Mysterio Jr. versus Billy Kidman versus Juventud Guerrera. I thought this was a great match. Back and forth match with Mysterio, Kidman, and Guerrera. Rey and Kidman both exchanged in the middle of the ring. Kidman was keeping the pace of the match. Kidman then has Rey on his shoulders. Guerrero then hits a Frankensteiner on Rey off of Kidman's shoulders. Mysterio then gets up, hits a springboard moonsault on Kidman. Kidman then gets up, hits a leg drop off the top rope for a near fall. Kidman then hits a powerbomb on Guerrero in the middle of the ring. Mysterio then hits a springboard Hurricane Rana. Kidman then hits a shooting star press to the outside, taking out Mysterio and Guerrero. Mysterio then hits a Eddie Guerrero then is here. Eddie then attacks Kidman. Kidman though ultimately hits a roll up, pins for the 3, and your winner of the match is Billy Kidman. Hats off to Kidman for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night, pretty much an impromptu match, if you will. It is for the WCW Cruiserweight Championship. It is Eddie Guerrero versus Billy Kidman. I thought this was a good matchup. Back and forth matchup between Guerrero and Kidman, with Guerrero keeping the pace of the match. Guerrero then hits Kidman with a boot. Guerrero then hits a springboard Hurricane Rana on Kidman. Kidman then gets up, hits a slingshot leg drop on Guerrero, and then Kidman ultimately hits his signature shooting star press off the top rope on Guerrero, pins for the 3, and your winner of the match is Billy Kidman. Hats off to Billy Kidman for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is Norman Smiley versus Prince Iaukea. I thought this was a good match. Back and forth matchup between Smiley and Iaukea, with Smiley keeping the pace of the match. And Norman Smiley ultimately applies his signature chicken wing on Prince Iaukea. And your winner of the match by submission is Norman Smiley. Hats off to Norman Smiley for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is Ernest Miller versus Saturn. I thought this was an okay matchup. Back and forth matchup between Ernest Miller and Saturn, with Saturn keeping the pace of the match. And Saturn ultimately hits his signature Death Valley driver on Ernest Miller, pins for the 3, and your winner of the match is Saturn. Hats off to Saturn for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is Fit Finlay teaming up with Jerry Flynn versus Scott Norton and Bryan Adams. I thought this was an okay matchup. Back and forth matchup between both teams, with Norton and Adams keeping the pace of the match, with Norton quickly hitting a powerbomb on Flynn, pins for the 3, and your winners of the match are Scott Norton and Bryan Adams. Hats off to Scott Norton and Bryan Adams for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is for the WCW Television Championship. It is Conan versus Chris Jericho. I thought this was a good matchup. Back and forth matchup between Conan and Jericho, with Jericho keeping the pace of the match. Conan then hits a rolling lariat on Jericho in the middle of the ring. Jericho then gets up, hits a lion salt on Conan, but Conan ultimately applies the Tequila Sunrise on Jericho, and your winner of the match is Conan. Hats off to Conan for getting the win in that matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is Ric Flair versus Eric Bischoff. I thought this was a good matchup. Back and forth matchup between Flair and Bischoff, with Flair keeping the pace of the match. Flair then applies a figure 4 leg lock on Bischoff. Hennig is here. Hennig then hands Eric Bischoff brass knuckles. Eric then hits Flair with the brass knuckles. Referee doesn't see it. Pins for the 3. And your winner of the match is Eric Bischoff. Hats off to Eric Bischoff for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is Diamond Dallas Page versus the Giant. I thought this was a good matchup. Back and forth matchup between DDP and the Giant, with Giant keeping the pace of the match. But DDP hits a diamond cutter off the top rope on the Giant, pins for the 3, and your winner of the match is Diamond Dallas Page. Hats off to Diamond Dallas Page for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is the main event of WCW Starrcade 1998. It is Kevin Nash versus Goldberg for the WCW World Heavyweight Championship. I thought this was a great match. Back and forth matchup between Nash and Goldberg, with Nash keeping the pace of the match. Disco Inferno was here. Goldberg then hits a spear on Disco Inferno. Bigelow is here as well. Bigelow then attacks Goldberg, but Goldberg sets up for a spear. Scott Hall makes his way down to the ring dressed as a WCW security guard, ends up tasing Goldberg, which allows Kevin Nash to hit the jackknife powerbomb, pins for the 3, and your winner of the match, and at that time new WCW World Heavyweight Champion, is Kevin Nash. A couple of things I'm going to say about Starrcade 98 before I get out of here, man. Number one, this was a really good event. Starting off with the first match of the night, the triple threat match for the Cruiserweight Championship. You got Mysterio versus Kidman versus Guerrera. I mentioned this multiple times in the past, man. I think the Cruiserweight division will always be synonymous in WCW, but it will also be severely underrated. I think the amount of talent that walked through that door that were Cruiserweights, guys like Dean Malenko, Rey Mysterio, Juventud Guerrera, Billy Kidman, Chris Benoit, Eddie Guerrero, Psychosis. Some of those guys, those Cruiserweights that walked through the door of WCW, man, are first ballot Hall of Famers. Just incredible talents, man. And to be honest with you, I don't think WCW and Eric Bischoff really knew what they had with that Cruiserweight division because, for me, 9 times out of 10, some of those Cruiserweight matches were almost better than some of the main event matches with some of the stuff that the Cruiserweights were doing, man. So it was a great opening match for Starrcade 1998. We also got Eddie Guerrero versus Billy Kidman. Again, it's pretty much what I just said about the Cruiserweights, man. Eddie Guerrero is an absolute legend. This was a fantastic matchup between Guerrero and Billy Kidman. Couple matches on here I could have done without. Norman Smiley versus Prince Iaukea. I mean, Prince Iaukea, number one, they really weren't pushing Iaukea in WCW. It just wasn't happening. I respect Norman Smiley. I think Norman Smiley has a lot of, at the time, had a lot of potential in WCW. And I think he held the Hardcore Championship for WCW a couple times, if I'm not mistaken. Prince Iaukea, though, man, it's one of those, unfortunately for me, it's one of those wrestlers that, when he has a match, you're not really looking forward to it, to be honest with you. Fit Finlay and Jerry Flynn versus Scott Norton and Brian Adams. Again, this was another match I could have done without. I think Fit Finlay was better suited to be a singles competitor than being a tag team. Jerry Flynn, again, I don't know a whole lot about Jerry Flynn. I don't think he had a really long career in WCW, but again, I think Fit Finlay was better suited to be a singles competitor rather than being in a tag team. Conan versus Chris Jericho was a solid matchup, with Conan becoming the new television champion at that time. Ric Flair versus Bischoff was a decent matchup. I was kind of hoping that Ric Flair would get the win over Bischoff, but unfortunately Kurt Hennig came out and helped Bischoff get the win. And then the main event. It all came down to the main event, man. Kevin Nash versus the Giant. This was, the World Heavyweight Championship was on the line, and the, Goldberg streak was on the line. And that all ended that night in Starrcade 1998 with Scott Hall coming out and attacking Goldberg and allowing, Kevin Nash to hit a jackknife powerbomb to end the streak, and for Kevin Nash to become the new World Heavyweight Champion. So it was definitely a historic night due to the fact that Goldberg had lost not only the belt, but lost the streak. He was no longer undefeated, man. So it made a big impact, especially on WCW, for sure, man. But just like I do with every single one of these pay-per-views, man, you guys know by now, I always give these pay-per-views a rating from 1 out of 10. 1 being the absolute worst, 10 being the absolute best. I'm going to have to give WCW Starrcade 1998 a solid 6 at best, man. But this is my review of WCW Starrcade 1998. I hope you guys are out there staying safe, be careful, and remember, stay classic. Peace.